Hello, students. My name is Manasseh Begay. I am the social work faculty for Diné College. I am a licensed clinical social worker and a licensed alcohol and drug abuse counselor in the state of New Mexico. Welcome to Social Work Ethics. Today we're going to talk about, this is going to be from Chapter 6, Regulation of Practice. I believe last week you guys had several videos about the government, how laws are made, how statutes are made. And today we're going to kind of look at a social work practice and what that looks like. And as you use the word social work practice, I want you to think about how you apply the things you've learned, apply the things that have been taught to you, and use that in the field. So working with clients of varying types, depending on what part of social work you go in, we still have an overall law and ethics and values that kind of go along with that. So one thing to kind of consider and to think about is before this job and before the jobs, I was a law enforcement officer for a while. One thing in part of that hiring process of becoming a law enforcement officer, I had a background check. So they looked at my past, they kind of looked at any history they could find of me and said, okay, is this guy a good guy? Does he fit within this field? Does he look like a person that we could trust him to take on this job? And so they looked into my past. They looked and did this like pretty thorough background check. They talked to my neighbors, talked to friends, talked to family members, and just kind of did this thorough background of who I am as a person. Then I was put through a lie detector test. Not a fun thing to go through, where you kind of like sit on the seat. They put a pad underneath you to see if you like squirm around in your seat. They put all these little cords and wires on you to see if you start sweating, if your heart rate changes, if blood flow kind of changes going on in your body, to see if I'm lying or not to the questions they chose to ask of me. And then I have to go through the academy, get trained in the laws, trained in this legality behind things, what you should and shouldn't do. And then after that, you go through this period of placement where they test you basically. You're supervised by somebody else, and then you go through kind of like these different levels of supervision as they allow you to kind of move forward into the field of law enforcement. And after all of that is said and done, then they say, okay, we will let you represent our agency, our department, and we feel like you can uphold the rules and regulations of a law enforcement officer. So that is that part of that job. And if you look at the job of social work and what it means to be a social worker, I really have a high value of this field. It's important to have a good representation of the field that you are in. So I want you to think about, as I was a cop, cops have a bad name. Somebody does something wrong, maybe they do an improper use of force. It gives this whole field like a really bad name, and then a lot of bad things happen to this field because of it. So as you think about social work, going into mental health counseling, or the field that you represent, you have to really consider who you are as a person and how you represent this field. Because there's a big thing like, I don't trust cops. I don't have a good belief in cops. And guess what? There's a lot of people out there that might say, hey, I don't trust counselors. I don't trust therapists. I don't trust social workers. And it's because, again, we could potentially bring the bad name on this field. So as you move into your practice and what you choose to do in this field, you have to really consider that and consider who you are as a person and how you're going to choose to uphold yourself, because part of the regulations of social work is they look at you, they look at your past, they do some form of background check on you before you can be a licensed social worker. And I use the term licensed. When I introduced myself in the beginning, I introduced myself as a licensed clinical social worker, an LCSW. Other states would use this term as a licensed independent social worker. But again, I use this term licensed. Some states might use the term registration, a certified, certification, credentialed. Kind of some of those words are going to be interchanged depending on what state you are in. But for most states, I would say the majority of states, they're going to use the term licensed. So I am a licensed clinical social worker. That means I practice my field at an independent level. So that means I do not require supervision. Before being a licensed clinical social worker, I was a licensed master social worker. So basically one level down. I still could practice in this field, but I required the supervision of somebody who was a licensed clinical or licensed independent social worker. I couldn't make certain decisions without receiving approval or a sign off by my supervisor. And that's how this field is as far as at this level. There is also licensed bachelor social workers out there in the world, and they have certain areas that they are allowed to participate in, but it's going to be at a lower level than at a master's level, where you go to get your master's degree, and you can practice again at a master's level with underneath supervision at some level. So this is kind of like how this field goes. There are different levels of social workers. The highest level, again, is going to be that clinical or independent social worker, with below that being a master's level social worker, and below that being a bachelor's level social worker. So kind of thinking about what you want to do. If you want to participate in counseling and therapy, you are required to go into the field at a minimum of a master's level. At the point of being at a master's level, and again, certain states are going to kind of vary a little bit in how they do this. You have a master's level. You graduate from school from an accredited College of Social Work. So the CSWE is an organization of the Council on Social Work Education, and they look at schools and they say, okay, is this school teaching all of these things about social work? And then they say, okay, yes, they are. They go through this credentialing process and they are accredited as a CSWE accredited school. Once you go through a CSWE accredited school and you reach that level of a master, okay, so you go through your bachelor's degree, you go into get a master's degree in social work, so it's much more specialized. And during this process, you'll probably go through some form of field placement where they put you in some agency and you'll be supervised and you'll probably do some work in that agency to kind of gain experience in the field of social work. Once you graduate, you can apply to be a provisional. So you're not fully fledged as a master's level social worker, but you get a provisional license. And during this period of time, what you need to do is study, because you have to take a test. And at the master's level, the test is more of a generalist. Okay, let me look at all these different areas of social work and I need to know something about it. I need to have this understanding of it. And that test is put on by an organization called ASWB, the Association of Social Work Board, and they provide states with this level of license, this level of testing. So you have to pass this test, and then once you pass this test, then they'll say, okay, you are a level LMSW, Licensed Master Social Worker. You have to be at this level for 2 years. Okay, so 2 years, you're going to be at the level of a licensed master social worker. And upon completion of these 2 years, during this time, you need to go through something called clinical supervision. So somebody who is an approved clinical supervisor for the state you're in will kind of like oversee you during this 2-year period of time in a practice setting. And they'll sign off on a certain amount of hours that you need. Again, this is going to be a state-specific thing. You need to have these different amount of hours of supervision, and then you can go in and take another test. And okay, these tests are very difficult. They're not easy, so they do take significant time studying. And upon completion of the second test, you will become a licensed clinical, licensed independent social worker. Again, dependent on the state you're in. Some things to keep in mind, again, you have to be 21 years old typically to reach this point. They're going to do a background check on you. One thing to keep in mind, I know people that maybe have been in trouble in the past. They've had DWIs, certain criminal past of some form or another. And they were still able to get to this level of a licensed clinical social worker. However, they probably had a good chunk of time in there where they made changes in their life. So that's one thing to keep in mind. They will do a background check on you. You'll have to pay to take this test. You'll have to pay your state some form of fee to become a master's level, a provisional level, a clinical level, a bachelor's level. And you'll have to pass these tests to get to kind of the next step that goes on in this field of social work. So that's kind of like a really basic rundown of kind of going through this field and going through these different organizations that are all in charge of kind of managing this field. The NASW Code of Ethics, the National Association of Social Workers. There's a link on week 2 in your Blackboard to the NASW rules and laws. That is something that you need to get very, very familiar with. If you choose to go on to a bachelor's and master's level, some schools will require you to memorize this whole code of ethics that goes along with being a social worker. And as you read through that code of ethics, what you are required to do as part of your week, read through that. And if you can read through that and say, that looks like me, okay, that definition right there, that resembles me, and that definition right there, that resembles me, you should be able to say that through everything in that code of ethics, that somewhere or another, that person that they're talking about resembles who I am. Because again, you're representing this field. That's a very high thing to do. And you have to kind of have value in that and have value in yourself to be able to represent this field, because that is of a significant importance. So read through that NASW Code of Ethics. Again, that's going to kind of give you this much more specified set of rules, laws, and ethics that you are upheld to. And any state that you're in, you're going to be upheld to those same rules and regulations, because every state has adopted those rules and regulations on top of some other things that are going to be very state specific. We'll cover some of those state specific things or some new laws as time goes on through this class, but you need to know those very basic things that go on and how you respond in certain situations when it comes to being a social worker and representing this field and moving into this field.